My name is Everly Hastings. I'm 33 years old, and until 11 months ago, I ran the finance department of a family that didn't know it needed rescuing. On our 7th wedding anniversary, at the restaurant where Nathan proposed to me, he set down his wine glass, looked at me the way you look at a spreadsheet you're finally closing out, and said, "I never loved you, Everly. Not for one day. It was always about the 32 million. I laughed. I actually laughed, because for half a second I thought it was a joke, the kind of dark humor we used with each other after too much wine. Then I saw his face, and I understood he had been waiting 7 years to say those words out loud. "Say that again," I said. "You heard me." He wasn't even angry. That was the part that carved through me. He said it the way you'd read a weather report. "Your grandfather's trust. The one that unlocks when you turn 34. I did the math before our second date. I sat very still, the way I do when a client's numbers don't add up, and I need to find the one decimal point that's lying to me. 34. My birthday was in 6 weeks. I filed for divorce this morning," he said, sliding an envelope across the white tablecloth like a dinner receipt. "My lawyer says Ohio's a fair state, especially when a wife signs a prenup she never actually read." I had read it. Every line. I'd drafted half of it myself, back when I still believed marrying a man meant building something with him, instead of watching him build something out of me. "You should eat your steak," I told him, and I meant it, because it was the last decent thing this restaurant would ever serve either of us. "It's the best thing you're going to get from me tonight." He smiled, that easy, practiced smile that had fooled 200 wedding guests and one very trusting woman. "The house is in my name too. You know. My lawyer already. Nathan." I opened my clutch and set my own envelope beside his, corners squared. "Before you finish that sentence, I need you to look at page 4 of the document you just handed me. The one your lawyer apparently didn't read either." His smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. The particular flicker of a man realizing the numbers. He'd built his whole marriage on might not be his numbers at all. Let me tell you what Nathan never bothered to learn about me, because it turns out that not knowing was the most expensive mistake of his life. I'm not just Everly Hastings, trust fund heiress waiting on a birthday. I'm a forensic accountant. 14 years untangling other people's lies for a living. Divorces, embezzlement, hidden shell companies. I've spent my career finding the decimal point. Men think nobody's smart enough to notice. When Nathan and I got engaged, my grandfather Walter, who built a logistics empire out of 3 delivery trucks and a stubborn streak, sat me down in his study. "Everly," he said, "money finds out who a man really is faster than time does. I've written the trust so it protects you either way." I didn't understand what he meant then. I understood it completely now, sitting across from a man calmly discussing my dismantling over medium rare filet. Page 4 of the prenup, the page Nathan's lawyer apparently skimmed, wasn't about the trust at all. It was about the consulting firm I'd quietly built during our marriage using my own name, my own clients, and crucially, a majority stake in Nathan's family construction business that he'd begged me to help refinance 3 years ago when his father's company was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. I'd saved it. I'd restructured the debt, brought in 2 new contracts, and taken 40% equity as payment, exactly the way I would have advised any stranger to negotiate. Nathan had signed that agreement without reading it either. He'd been too relieved to be saved to notice who was doing the saving. "You own 40% of my father's company," he said slowly, like the sentence tasted wrong in his mouth. "I own 40% of our asterisk company," I corrected. "The one that just won the Cuyahoga County infrastructure contract. The one whose quarterly filing goes out next Monday, with my name on the ownership disclosure right next to yours." He reached for his phone. I let him. I watched him scroll, watch the color, leave his face in real time as he found the filing draft. I'd emailed to the accounting team that very morning, CCing his father. You did this on purpose, he said. You knew about tonight. I hadn't known about tonight. I want to be honest about that, because what came next only makes sense. If you understand, I hadn't planned his confession, only prepared, quietly, for years, for the version of Nathan I always suspected was underneath the one I married. No, I said. But I've known about you for a while now, Nathan. I just needed you to say it out loud first. His phone buzzed in his hand. Then buzzed again. Then a third time, fast, urgent, the rhythm of a man's world beginning to move without his permission. Nathan's phone kept buzzing like something trapped. He finally looked down, and I watched his jaw tighten in a way I recognized. The same look he used to get when a subcontractor called with bad news he'd have to fix by morning. It's my father, he said. Answer it, I said. I already did 20 minutes ago, in the ladies' room. That stopped him cold. Nathan's father, Robert Hastings. No relation to me, just an unfortunate coincidence of surnames. That used to make people laugh at our wedding. Had built Hastings Construction from a single crane and a bank loan he almost didn't get. He was 71 years old, still sharp enough to read a balance sheet in his sleep, and the one person in Nathan's life who had never fully trusted his son's charm. I called Robert last week, I said, after my attorney flagged something odd in the county filing system. Somebody had quietly amended the company's operating agreement 8 months ago, diluting my equity stake from 40% down to 12%, without my signature. Forge, actually. Badly forged, if I'm honest. Whoever did it used a scanned copy of my signature from a permit application, and permit signatures don't match legal ones. Rookie mistake. Nathan's hand had gone very still around his phone. You didn't do that alone, I continued. You don't understand escrow structures well enough to hide a forged amendment, 3 layers deep in a subsidiary filing. But I know exactly who does. I trained her myself. Melissa, in your accounting office. Lovely woman. Terrified of subpoenas, it turns out. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Nathan. I audit. I reached into my clutch again and slid a second folder across the table. This one thin, deliberate. That's a copy of the email Melissa sent you in March, the one where she said, and I'm quoting, "This could look like fraud if anyone checks." You wrote back, "Nobody checks, she trusts me." He didn't touch the folder. He didn't need to. His face had already told me everything the paper confirmed. Your father is on his way here right now, I said. Not because I called him for sympathy, because I called him as a 40%, soon to be reinstated at full 40%, with damages owner of his company, and told him his son had been forging documents to steal from his own wife behind both our backs. The restaurant door chimed. I didn't turn around, but I watched Nathan's face do it for me. Watch every ounce of composure drain out of him as a man in a grey overcoat walked in, jaw set, eyes locked on his son like he was staring at a stranger wearing his boy's face. Dad, Nathan started. Robert didn't sit down. He looked at me first, then at his son, and said the sentence I'd been waiting 11 months to hear someone else say out loud. Tell me it isn't true, Nathan. Tell me right now. Nathan didn't answer his father. That silence told Robert everything the folder hadn't already. Robert Hastings pulled out the chair beside me, not beside his son, and sat down slowly, like a man lowering himself into water he already knew was too cold. He looked at the papers, put on the reading glasses he kept clipped to his shirt pocket, and read every line of that forged amendment without saying a word. I've watched a lot of people read bad news for a living. Robert read it like an engineer inspecting a bridge he'd just been told was structurally unsound, quiet, thorough, already calculating what it would take to keep it from collapsing on the people standing under it. Melissa filed this? He finally asked. Under instruction, I said. She's already spoken to my attorney. She's cooperating fully. I imagine she'd rather keep her CPA license than protect your son. Robert set the papers down and looked at Nathan with an expression I hadn't seen from him before, not disappointment, which I think he could have survived, but something closer to grief. I built this company, so you'd never have to lie for anything, Nathan. I gave you 40 years of a good name. Dad, it's not. Nathan started. Don't, Robert said, and the single word landed harder than anything I'd said all night. He turned to me. Everly, I'm sorry. Deeply sorry. Whatever you need from Hastings Construction to make this right, you'll have it. The board meets Thursday. Your equity gets reinstated at 40%, plus whatever your attorney calculates for damages, and I'll be recommending it personally. Thank you, Robert. And I meant it. He was the only Hastings man who'd ever actually earned my trust, and he was about to lose the version of his son he'd spent a lifetime believing in. Nathan's phone buzzed again. A fourth time, and this time he actually looked at it, and something in his face changed. Panic layered under panic, like a man realizing the ground under the ground was also giving way. What, Robert said, watching him. Is that? Nathan didn't answer. He just stared at the screen like it might rearrange itself into something less catastrophic if he waited long enough. I already knew what it was because I'd made sure of it myself 3 days earlier, quietly, the way I do everything. It was an email from the county recorder's office, CC'd automatically to every listed owner of record on a certain piece of commercial real estate downtown, the building that housed Hastings Construction's headquarters. A building I'd learned, during 14 years of finding things men hoped stayed buried, that Nathan had quietly refinanced 8 months ago, using paperwork that listed me as a cosigner. Paperwork I had never signed. Robert reached over and turned Nathan's phone toward himself before Nathan could stop him. I watched an old man's face go through something I wouldn't wish on anyone reading his son's name on a mortgage refinancing document, next to a signature that belonged to me but wasn't mine. Everly, Robert said carefully. Did you sign this? No. You're certain? I'm a forensic accountant, Robert. I don't get certain. I get proven. I slid a third folder across the table. I'd known. This dinner would need more paper than food. That's a notarized statement from Diane Colton, the notary whose stamp is on that refinancing document. Diane's been in the business 22 years. She doesn't remember me because I was never in her office. She does, however, remember a man matching Nathan's description who came in alone in March, claiming his wife was running late and would sign later at home. She notarized a signature that was already on the page. Nathan finally spoke, and his voice had lost every trace of the calm, restaurant tone he'd used to detonate our marriage 2 hours earlier. Everly. Listen. I panicked. The company needed capital. The bank wanted collateral. And I knew if I explained it to you, you'd want equity, terms, control. I'd have wanted a signature, I said. My actual one. On a legal document. That's not control, Nathan. That's law. Robert stood up, and for the first time all evening, he looked directly at his son, the way a man looks at someone he no longer entirely recognizes. Forging a legal document isn't a business decision, Nathan. It's a felony. Mortgage fraud, identity fraud. And you did it to your own wife, on paperwork tied to my company. His voice cracked on the last few words, the first crack I'd heard from him all night. I have to call the bank. Tonight. Before this becomes something I can't undo for either of us. Dad, please. I am still trying, Robert said quietly, to decide whether I'm doing this as your father, or as the owner of a company that cannot survive a fraud investigation. Give me a minute to figure out which one wins. Nathan turned back to me, and something desperate came into his eyes. The particular desperation of a man realizing the walls he'd built to trap someone else had somehow rebuilt themselves around him. Everly, we can fix this. Quietly. Before the bank. Before my father does something we can't take back. You don't want this in a courtroom any more than I do. I picked up my wine glass, the one I hadn't touched since he told me he never loved me, and I finally took a sip. Nathan, I said, I've spent 4 years quietly proving things men swore couldn't be proven. Quiet was never going to save you. It's just the only thing keeping you standing right now. Robert stepped away from the table to make his call to the bank, and for a moment it was just Nathan and me, the wreckage of a 7-year marriage sitting between 2 half-eaten steaks. He leaned forward, voice low, the practiced charm trying one last time to do the work his lies no longer could. You could still stop this, he said. One phone call. Tell your attorney it was a misunderstanding. Tell the bank you signed it, and just forgot. We go home tonight. We figure out the money privately, like adults. No felony charges. No board vote. No headline with the Hastings name in it. You want me to lie for you? I said. The same night you told me the truth for the first time in 7 years. I want you to think about what happens to both of us if this goes public. You lose privacy. I lose everything. No, I said. I lose nothing I didn't already lose the moment. You sat down and told me you never loved me. You're the one who's about to discover what losing everything actually feels like. His phone buzzed one more time, and this one he didn't want to look at. I could tell. But he did, because some part of him still believed control was a habit he could pick back up if he just reached for it fast enough. His face went grey. He turned the screen toward me without meaning to, hand shaking slightly. It was a text from Melissa. Detectives called the office. They want to talk to me tomorrow morning. I already told my lawyer everything, Nathan. I'm not going to prison for you. Asterisk. She's going to cooperate, I said, not even needing to read it myself. People usually do, once they understand which side of a fraud case actually has the paperwork. Robert returned to the table, phone still in hand, his face older than it had looked an hour ago. The bank's fraud department is opening a file tonight. They'll want a statement from you, Everly, confirming the signature isn't yours. And Nathan. He stopped, steadied himself against the back of his chair. The board meets in the morning, not Thursday. I moved it up. I have to tell them what I just told the bank. Dad, you're going to destroy the company over this. No, Robert said. And his voice had gone flat and final, the voice of a man who'd spent 40 years learning the difference between a bad quarter and a bad son. You already did that. I'm just the one who has to tell everyone the truth about it. I watched Nathan look between his father and me, searching for a version of tonight where he still came out ahead, and finding, for the first time in his life, that the numbers simply weren't there anymore. The next 3 weeks moved the way real consequences always do. Slower than a courtroom drama, faster than Nathan could outrun. The board met that Friday morning without him in the room. Robert walked in with the notarized statement from Diane Colton, Melissa's signed cooperation agreement, and the county recorder's fraud flag on the refinancing document. And by noon, Nathan had been removed as VP of operations at the company his own last name was stitched into. Robert didn't do it out of anger. He did it, he told me later over coffee at my attorney's office, because a man who forges his wife's signature to steal collateral will forge a client's signature to steal a contract. And Robert had spent 40 years building a name he wasn't willing to let his son spend down to nothing. My equity was reinstated at the full 40% within the week. Backdated, with damages calculated by my own firm and verified by an independent. Auditor Robert insisted on hiring himself, just so nobody could ever say the numbers had been softened for me. The divorce, once Nathan's attorney finally read page 4 properly, moved fast in the direction it should have moved from the beginning. Ohio doesn't reward a man for forging documents against his own wife, and my prenup, the one I drafted myself, the one Nathan never bothered to actually study, had a clause even I'd have forgotten writing. Any attempt at fraud, forgery, or concealment of assets during the marriage voided his claim to marital property entirely. Not reduced. Voided. The house went to me. Not because I fought hard for it, but because there was, legally, nothing left for Nathan to fight with. The mortgage fraud investigation moved separately. Slower, colder, entirely out of my hands and exactly where I wanted it. Detectives interviewed Melissa twice. They interviewed Diane Colton once. They didn't need to interview me more than that first statement, because I'd already handed them a paper trail, so clean it barely needed a detective at all, just someone willing to read it in order. 6 weeks after that anniversary dinner, 2 days before my 34th birthday and the trust unlocking, Nathan had built his entire marriage around. I received a call from my attorney. Nathan had been formally charged. Forgery, mortgage fraud, and identity theft. 3 separate counts. His name now sitting on a public docket the same way mine had once sat, unknowingly, on paperwork that was never really mine to begin with. I hung up the phone, sat alone in the kitchen of a house that had finally, legally, entirely become mine, and I thought about the version of myself who'd sat across that restaurant table 11 months ago, and simply asked him to repeat what he'd said. I still had one card left to play. Not for the courts. For me. My 34th birthday landed on a Tuesday, ordinary in every way except the one that mattered. The trust unlocked at 9 that morning, exactly as my grandfather had written it 11 years earlier, and $32 million became mine to hold without a single hand reaching for it uninvited. I sat at my kitchen table, my table in my house, under a deed with only one name on it now, and I didn't feel triumphant, so much as finally, quietly, whole. There was one card left, and I want to be honest about why I played it, because it wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic, the kind my grandfather taught me before he taught me anything else. Every debt gets settled, even the ones nobody wrote down. I used part of that money to buy Nathan's plea deal, a complication he hadn't expected. Not leniency, the opposite. I funded, through my firm, a forensic review of every contract Hastings Construction had signed under Nathan's authority for the past 5 years, and handed the full findings to the prosecutor free of charge. It turned out the forged refinancing wasn't his first quiet shortcut, just the first one that had a wife smart enough to notice. 2 more counts got added before sentencing. He took a plea in the end. 18 months, full restitution, and a felony record that will follow him into every job interview for the rest of his life. Robert called me the morning of the sentencing, his voice steadier than I expected. I should have looked harder, he said, at the man I raised. I told him what I believed then and believe now, that Nathan built himself in private, long before either of us was watching closely enough to stop him. Robert kept his 40% honest and his door open to me anyway, the way you keep a friendship that survived the person who nearly ruined it. Melissa kept her license. I made sure of that too, quietly, the way I do most things. A phone call to the state board explaining that cooperation under coercion isn't the same as guilt. I didn't buy a cabin by a lake, the way I once imagined I might if I ever got free. I did something smaller, and, somehow, louder. I repainted the dining room where Nathan used to sit across from me pretending, hung new curtains, and hosted my first anniversary dinner alone this year. Just me, a good bottle of wine, and a toast to a version of myself who once sat still in a restaurant, watched a man detonate 7 years in one sentence, and simply asked him to say it again, so she'd have it on record before she ever needed it. Some men marry a woman for her money. They never stop to ask what she does for a living. Mine finds the decimal point.